All right, so we're gonna look at the last unit that we're gonna do. It's gonna be kind of short because we only have a couple weeks left. This is called biodiversity and speciation. So if we break down these words, bio means living, diversity means like variety, lots of different things. So lots of different types of living things. And then speciation, what word does that sound like? It sounds like species. So we're gonna learn how new species are formed. Okay, so we're going to look today at some graphs, okay? So there's going to be a lot of graphs and patterns in this unit. So in nature, many traits or many genes follow what we call a bell curve. Here's why we call it a bell curve. This is a bell curve because if you take a look at it, it kind of looks like a bell, right? So they call this a bell curve, meaning it's got the most or the highest in the middle, and it's got very little on either end. So this is a graph of the height of North American men. So on this side, we have the number of people. So if I asked you, well, how many people in North America do you think, how many adults do you think are 4 feet tall? What would you tell me? Or how many are 3 feet tall? How many adults are 3 feet tall? Not very many, right? So that's why we have not very many over here, because notice it's not very high. Number of people, this would be like low number of people, this would be high. How many people do you think in North America are 7 feet tall? You'd say, oh, Ms. Frank said not very many, right? So very tall, they're over here. That's why it's not very high. How many do you think are 5'8"? You'd say, oh my gosh, a lot, right? And that's why in the middle, it's really high. So usually in the middle, the medium is really, really high. And we see this a lot in nature, okay? Maybe we're not talking about the height of North American men. Maybe we're talking about the average height of a tree or the average weight of a cheetah, okay? There's gonna be a lot in the middle and only some that have a lot or that are really high, and some that are little or very low, okay? Now, the reason we're talking about this is because in nature disrupts some of these curves, okay? So you'll notice we have this curve. Nature disrupts this, and sometimes with natural selection, we can get this curve to change. So maybe all of a sudden, if let's say, for example, in North American men, it's really good to be really tall all of a sudden, okay? And we have all the short people kind of die off. Then all of a sudden we get this moving over to the right because the largest amount of people are going to be really, really tall. So we're going to talk about the different patterns and the different ways that this graph can move. The first way is called stabilizing selection, okay? So let's look at this graph before you write anything down. Normally, here's our original population, this dotted line. Here's what our normal bell curve, our normal graph looks like, okay? Now, in stabilizing selection, the people with the middle trait have the highest fitness, okay? So let's think about let's say, for example, a population of moths, okay? And maybe these are really dark colored moths, and these are light colored moths, and these are medium. Well, let's say that the ground or the trees are medium in color. So the medium ones are gonna survive even more. So our graph ends up being even taller here at the medium than it originally was, because the dark ones aren't surviving very much and the light ones aren't surviving very much. So stabilizing selection, it just means that the middle becomes even higher. So the next type of selection we have is called disruptive selection. So again, here are little moths. We've got the dark colored moth over here, the light colored moth over here. So again, here's where it normally falls, right? The medium one is the most common. In disruptive selection, what actually happens, Let's say, for example, the trees all turn really light and really dark, but there's no medium colored trees. What happens then is the really light ones become common and the really dark ones become common, but there aren't any in the middle, so it goes down in the middle. Okay, so this is disruptive selection. If you're taking notes, I would just recommend drawing a little M for this one on your paper. All right, so we have directional selection. Here's the third and last one. Okay, this is with one extreme form of the trait end up surviving or becoming the most common or having the greatest fitness. Remember, fitness is the ability to survive and reproduce. So normally, again, here's our population. We've got our light colored moths, you know, the medium ones are the most common, and then the dark colored ones. You guys did a worksheet yesterday, or last week, I should say, and you saw that when there was a lot of pollution, the trees became darker, and then the dark moths became more common. So this is showing us that the darker ones are becoming more common. This is an example of directional selection. We'll do a little practice with this in a minute. So the last thing I want to talk about, we have 2 slides, is how do new species form, okay? So when we get different patterns like are on these graphs, sometimes it can result in new species, okay? So new species form when groups of individuals become too different and then they can no longer mate. So when we talk about species, we talk about their ability to mate. Can they mate? Can they produce offspring? If they can't, they're not the same species. This is why a cat and a dog can't breed to make a cat dog, okay? Dogs can breed with each other because they're the same species. You might ask, well, what about like a golden retriever and a black lab? Well, those are what we call subspecies, but they're still dogs, so they can still breed together. Let's look at this picture down below. There's a lot of different ways that new species can form, but basically they have to be separated. 2 groups have to be separated and become different. So we start with this brown beetle population. Notice there's like a river here that starts flowing through their habitat, and it divides them into 2 different populations, 2 groups. Over time, this group becomes green. So maybe their environment becomes more green, it's got more trees, so they become green. Now, remember, these guys aren't changing colors, okay? It's not like, oh, the trees are green, so I'm gonna be like a chameleon and change my color to green. That's not what's happening. What's happening is that over thousands of years, the brown ones are getting eaten off, so only the green ones survive. And eventually over time, then we're left with only green ones. On the other side of the river, we have brown beetles. And in their environment, brown is working just fine. Maybe they also don't have a mutation for the green beetle. And so they end up becoming brown. So now we've got 2 different populations here, a green one and a brown one. And the real test is if we put them together, can they breed and produce offspring? If they can make offspring, they're still the same species. They're just different colors. And if they can't, then they're new species. So this definition gets a little tricky. What I want to show you here is an example of a horse, a donkey, and a mule. Okay, so let's understand the definition for a species. Okay. So I'm going to type this out. I had it on the slide, but it got erased. So a species, a group of individuals that look similar and can interbreed. That is our definition for a species. So I would definitely write that down. I will finish this. So they have to be able to mate or interbreed, that's what we mean, and produce offspring. But it can get a little tricky. Here's why. If we take a look at this horse and the donkey, okay, we've got a horse, we got a donkey. They can mate. So they're different species, but they can mate. And when they mate, they produce a mule. You probably have heard of a mule. But here's the catch. The mule, The mule can live a happy life, but it can't have any babies. It's sterile. So do we consider a mule a species? It can't breed with a horse, can't breed with a donkey, and it can't breed with another mule. It can't make any babies. So if it can't make offspring, is it still a different species? This is where it gets a little tricky, okay? So again, species, they have to get, or groups have to get separated and then become different over time for them to be different species, okay? And we determine this by putting those two groups together and seeing if they can mate. If they can mate, then they're the same species. If they can't, they're different species. So let's look at your assignment here. Okay, you have this assignment on Google Classroom. I'll pull it up. This is what it looks like at the top. Fill in the notes video, and then you got the speciation video, and then the practice, okay? So we're on the practice part at the bottom. So it says here, starlings, or birds, produce an average of 5 eggs in each clutch. So a clutch is just like in each batch, in each group. If there are more than 5, the parents cannot adequately feed the young. If there are fewer than 5, predators may destroy the entire clutch. As a result, 5 eggs becomes the most common clutch size, okay? So let's take a look. It says the average is 5 eggs. If there's more than 5, the parents can't feed them. So what's gonna happen if there's more than 5? They're probably not gonna live very long, right? And if there's fewer than 5, predators are gonna destroy it. So 5 is the most common. So 5 is the highest amount. Which graph down here shows 5 as the highest amount? Now remember, we're looking at the dark blue lines. The dashed lines show us what the original population is, right? So our original population was showing us that there were 5 is the most common. We want to know which graph shows us that 5 is becoming even more common. So notice on C here, see that little letter C? 5 is the highest still, right? So we have 5 eggs down here. So this would be C. And what is the name of this type of selection? If you go back to your notes, this is stabilizing selection. Okay, so you just have to look at your notes or go back to the video to see. I'll do one more with you. Seed cracker birds have either large beaks or small beaks. They do not have medium-sized beaks, okay, because medium-sized beaks do not allow for adequate cracking of seeds, which represents the scenario, okay? So it says they either have large or small, they do not have medium. So we need to find a graph that shows that there's no medium, meaning it's really small on the medium. So notice, let's look at this first graph, A. Where do we have the most? We have the most here at large, right? Does this say we have the most large? It does, but it also says we have small beaks. Let's look at the next one. Where do we have the highest? The blue line here is the highest at small and large. And then letter C, where is it the highest? In medium. So which one represents not having medium-sized beaks? It'd be letter B, because see, down here, medium's really low, whereas small and large are high, so B. And which type of selection is this? So we have to go back to our notes, we have to look, and we see that this one matches disruptive selection. So I want you to finish the rest of this, and then you'll need to go back also and do the video questions too. They go over how species form, okay? Now, as a reward, I have kittens for you to see. I'm fostering kittens, so I will put those on and you can see them. All right, we got some little kittens for you to see. Say hi. So these are the 3 little kittens I have. And I'm sure they're super curious about the computer right now.